All right, all right, all right. Here we are, very, very excited, talking about something very, very incredible with two incredible people, Dr. Mason and Dr. Bullock. I am a candidate for United States Congress. My name is Dr. Richard Watkins, and today is Discussions of the Dream. And I think it's very important to call it Discussions of the Dream because the question is there. Are we the living embodiment of the dream that Dr. King referred to? Or do we have so much further to go, and what obstacles and opportunities stand before us? And here to talk this are two amazing individuals. I have the luxury of talking with incredible people all the time, and today is no exception. Two public intellectuals, Dr. Bullock and Dr. Mason. For those who don't know, Dr. Bullock is absolutely a rock star. Dr. Bullock earned her doctorate at UNC Chapel Hill, Tar Heel, the same place I got my PhD from, and my wife, doctorate at UNC Chapel Hill in policy and leadership at school improvement program. Her research interests are critical race theory, whiteness studies, white children's racial identity construction, and anti-racism. Some of her publications include Racial Identity Construction, a critical analysis of white children recognizing, reifying, and resisting whiteness, Raising Conscious Kids, a community-based approach, and Challenging Whitewash Curriculum, a critical race theory approach. Dr. Bullock is the co-founder and lead curator of We Are, which stands for Working to Extend Anti-Racist Education as a nonprofit. We Are provides anti-racism training for children, parents, and educators. We Are uses a three-pronged approach to dismantle systemic racism in education and beyond by offering summer camps for children in rising first through fifth grades, workshops for families, and professional development for educators. Prior to starting We Are, Dr. Bullock taught English for almost 10 years at Hillside High School in Durham, North Carolina, where she now resides. Next, we have Dr. Mason. Dr. Mason holds a doctor in ministry degree in African American social and environmental justice from the Interdenominational Theological Center. His dissertation was Black Ancestors Matter, Ancestral Memory, Genealogy, and DNA, the African American Church. Dr. Mason has taught at both Morris Brown and Morehouse Colleges in Atlanta. He is the author of numerous books on the history of African Americans' experience in the South, and has also curated major exhibitions as well as consulted on PBS documentaries. He has presented genealogy workshops throughout the country. Dr. Mason is also the senior pastor of historic West Mitchell CME Church in Atlanta, Georgia. And shout out to CME. I am a member of St. Joseph CME in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. So let's get right into it. What does MLK Day mean to you? And what should it mean to our country in today's time? And Dr. Bullock, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Dr. Watkins, for having me. I'm very honored and blessed to be on this panel with you and with Dr. Mason as well. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day means a lot. It's about remembering. It's about remembering his legacy and what he stood for. And it's also about remembering the call on us who are here right now to keep his legacy living, right? It's about us naming and being involved in our community and naming like where are the issues where we need to support, where do we need to keep pushing, where do we need to stand up? And it's a reminder that we can't rest, but we can rest. Those who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. And there's also this balance of we do have to care for ourselves, right? This movement of self-care that has come to the forefront, and we recognize we do need to do. But it also reminds us that we can't maybe we can't stop. Maybe that's the language. We can't stop. We haven't achieved the dream, which I know we'll get to that later on, but it's just a constant reminder that there's work to be done, that we stand on the backs of great leaders, Martin Luther King Jr. included, but also other folks as well. And, they paved the way for us so that we can keep going. And I think that's something that his birthday reminds us in our celebration of it each year, to be intentional, to not forget what he has done and what our other ancestors have done. And so much, there's still so much work that we need to do. And it's a celebration. It's a celebration of his life and what he was able to accomplish while he was here, and all of the people that he has inspired for generations and generations to come. So I'm just thankful that we get to do this on this day and throughout the year.
And that's exactly what so many people feel. Dr. Mason, now you're in Atlanta. Does it mean something different to you being in Atlanta, Georgia, and being kind of a historian of Atlanta, Georgia, as you are, and also being a member of, the alphas such as Martin Luther King was? What is your unique perspective on this coming from you?
Well, Dr. Bullock summed it up perfectly. I'm going to be a little redundant. It means a great deal that we pause for a moment to remember and to honor and to reflect on the great work and legacy of Dr. King. It means that we get a chance to examine, re-examine, and to explore Dr. King's writings and philosophies, his thinkings and thoughts, the evolution of his social work, his civil rights work, because it evolved over a period of time. As a native Atlantan, as I am, certainly it means something special. Growing up in the city of Atlanta, the birthplace of Dr. King, being friends with his daughter, Bernice, growing up with her, and knowing the family, having the opportunity to see firsthand the work that he did in the city. And so we celebrate with great pride, immense pride, the fact that first an African American man has a holiday named for him, the first and only. And so early on, the mantra was a day on, not a day off, because typically when we have federal holidays, it's the day to relax and to chill at home. But this day is supposed to mean that it is a day of commitment and a day of service. But I would say to you that because of the times that we're living in right now, because of the oppressive regime in our federal government right now, because of what we're trying to do in terms of voter rights and the Voter Act, that we have to examine this day differently. And at some point, we have to wake up from our sleep and make the dream become a reality. And I know you're going to talk about the dream, but it's time for us to not just to dream, but to wake up and to move in our God-given right for equal rights and social justice. And so that's what I think this day means and should mean for many of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really interesting thing. He is the only African American with a holiday. Why do you think there is? There are many amazing public orators. There were many amazing people doing amazing work. And unfortunately, there were many people who gave their lives for the advancement of human rights. So tell me a little bit about why you think, Martin Luther King was special, and why is he the only one with a day when so many others did similar work?
So very early on, if I might just chime in, he was often referred to as the modern day Moses. And if you know the story of Moses and Pharaoh and Moses moving the people to the promised land, then we understand the reluctant work that Dr. King entered. He was very well educated, Morehouse, Crozer, Boston. He had hoped to have a career as a preacher, perhaps, and as a public theologian, intellectual, and a professor. But God placed him in a place and time and called him into action. And so because of that, and the work that he did, and all of the people that he led, that he worked with and followed him, and the lasting legacy of what he did in his short 39 years on earth, I'm not surprised that there was this push to create a national holiday because he is a name that is synonymous with civil rights, with equal rights, with great opportunity for Black people and for white people. So I'm grateful that we have a holiday. I'm grateful that I was a part of an organization that led the movement to build a monument on the mall in Washington, D.C. The only Black man with a holiday and the only Black man on the mall in Washington, D.C. But his work is worthy to be celebrated. And I think that you're having this conversation today is very appropriate and very timely, particularly for your aspirations that you have. I think that it is right on point.
Well, and Dr. Bullock, I want you to touch on this, but I also want you to answer another question. You know, the conversation often is, you know, are we, you know, getting closer to the dream, right? You know, me personally, I feel as though I'm the living embodiment of the dream. I wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the sacrifice of Dr. King and so many others. But if you wouldn't mind touching on, you know, how special, you know, Dr. King is in the context of other great leaders at the time, but also from your point of view, could you discuss like what the dream actually is?
Sorry, you know, as long as we've been on Zoom, you still got to remember to mute. I think it's complex. You know, there's that T-shirt that says like, I am my ancestors' wildest dream, right? In a lot of ways, I feel like we all are, like we're 3 Black doctorates, right? I mean, we're like unicorns, like that in and of itself, it's just not that common, right? And so in a lot of ways, we are embodying the dream. We're breaking generational curses. We're fighting for advocacy in our communities and our neighborhoods in ways that, you know, even our ancestors, even in some ways that, you know, King couldn't do. And so I would just say that in some ways we are, you know, the embodiment of the dream. And we're also, we're not the dream. Like the dream has not been fulfilled, right? And I think right now you have to sit with, where are we? You know, we're in the midst of a COVID pandemic, and I've heard people say a racism pandemic. I've also heard them use a 1619 pandemic, right? Like we're not post-racial, we're not beyond racism. You know, we just had the 1-year anniversary of the white supremacist terrorist attack on the Capitol, right? We are now fighting again for voting rights. How are we still to this day fighting for voting rights, right? And here in North Carolina with the gerrymandered district and having to go to court and sue because of conservatives gerrymandering and putting unfair policies and borders in place to give them the upper hand. And so, you know, it's just so much more to be done. And I think, you know, for me, and I do critical race theory work, and, you know, critical race theory is a hot button topic now. Not anything necessarily have to do with actual critical race theory, but because it's being used as a part of a white supremacist push, this uprising fascism to take the country back, right? It's anti-democratic, it's anti-education, it's anti-truth-telling. And so we can't say that we're at the dream, that we're there, that we've achieved it. We're moving there, but sometimes it feels like we take some steps forward and some steps back. And so I just think that you know, we have to not become complacent. As Dr. Mason had said, you know, we have to stay woke, continue to awaken to the harsh realities that are around us, and we cannot settle, because the push for white supremacy is a well-funded movement. And so it's going to take a lot of effort to continue to push back that, so that we can be moving in the right direction towards the dream.
Wow. Well, and you know, one thing that I really always kind of picked up from you, kind of reading in between the lines, and I don't ever know if this is what you communicated, but you know, white supremacy victimizes often white folks as well as Black folks as well, because one of the things of critical race theory that I think is so problematic for the architects of institutionalized racism is this concept of interest convergence, that if you are able to kind of chip away at the foundation and knock down establishments of white supremacy, then white folks themselves are liberated. And we can't have that, right? Because that's so problematic to the infrastructure of white supremacy. Dr. Mason, talk to me a little bit about the dream as you see it.
So Dr. Watkins and Dr. Bullock, the dream is complex. And there are so many facets to the dream. Dr. King eloquently laid out a case in his great I Have a Dream speech in 1963, before he actually presented the dream. He talked about, the conditions. He talked about the check which was returned. He gave all kind of imagery and allegory to creating a case, and then he went into his dream. And as you reread the speech, you can see that the dream is still a dream. There are various aspects of the dream that has not been made a reality. And that is disconcerting, because here we are 60 some years later. Someone went and found a press conference that Dr. King gave on the shameful filibustering that goes on in Congress to prevent action for African Americans. I saw it this morning on one of the news shows. This was done 60 years later, and we're still having the very same conversation. And so it causes you to wonder how much has been fulfilled in the dream, what is left to be fulfilled. And sometimes we have to revisit it. When we look at what's going on with voting rights and the lack of passage, and I hope on Tuesday they're able to pass it. When we look at what's going on with police brutality, the George Floyd bill, when we view this most moving and emotional miniseries, Women of the Movement, the life of Mamie and Emmett Till. In some instances, it reminds us that even though we've come a long way, we still have not come far enough as it relates to the treatment of our Black boys and our Black girls. And so I say to you that we need to do as the great group, I believe it was, oh God, it wasn't the OJs, but they said, wake up everybody, no more sleeping in bed. It's time for us to wake up. It's time for us to wake up and get up. When we look at what's about to happen in November, particularly with voting and how the Georgia State Legislature has already come in and changed voting so that a group decides the final outcome. And so that these repressive and oppressive laws that will prevent Black folks primarily, when we talk about the critical race theories, as Dr. Bullock has mentioned, how they are preventing the teaching of all sides, and particularly the African-American sides. Yet during this weekend, most of these senators and governors and legislators are going to pipe a Martin Luther King Jr. quote out of their mouth. And I just find that it is just absolutely shameful. And so it's time for us, brothers and sisters, to wake up. No truer scene than the end of school days. And I remember when School Days was filmed on Clark's campus. It is time for us Black folks to wake up. And wake up means that when we wake up, we got to get up. And when we get up, we got to do something about the conditions that we're in.
Yeah, yes, right. It's not enough to be woke. You also have to get out of bed. So that was a good one. And I think it's always very telling, right? Dr. King has said a lot, given many speeches, a lot of words and a lot of quotes to choose from. I think it's always telling when people cherry pick certain quotes and then leave others out. It tells a lot about what they're trying to use those quotes. My favorite quote is, and I'm going to butcher it, so just please forgive me, look it up whenever you're checking this out at home. But he always says that the folks who want to do evil in the world, who want to make the world a worse place than it is, they always seem to make a more effective use of their time. They use time more efficiently than those who claim to want to do good. I always thought that was so fascinating, because that is the truth. I feel that the evil forces in the world, the people who are trying to take rights away, to try to dehumanize so many people, they never get tired. They never lose hope. They work 24/7 on holidays to snatch the rug right from out from under your feet. And I tell you, they don't take a day off. They don't get tired. So what I want to know is, when everybody is quoting things, right? If Dr. King had an ability to touch down in the year 2022, in the world of TikTok, in the world of tennis stars trying to not do what they need to do as far as COVID and so on and so forth, what do you think Dr. King would say if he touched down today and looked at America? Dr. Mason?
Wow, that's a good question. I think that Dr. King would be pleased with the progress that we've made. I think he would be disappointed with the total lack of engagement that people are involved in because of the gains that have been made. You know, it's like that great episode of the Jeffersons, and I use this often, where Florence goes for an interview to be the maid with George and Wheezy. Then the Willises come in, and Florence stands in the doorway, and she looks at them and she said, "You all are Black and you live here." And she looks at Helen Willis and says, "You're Black and you live here." She says, "Well, if we have overcome, how come nobody told her?" I think that is one of the most powerful and profound statements. Some people think we have overcome, okay, because of the gains, particularly the materialistic gains, but we have not overcome when our voting rights are threatened. We have not overcome when we fear driving, when you have sons, as I have a son, and you have to have that talk. My son is a freshman at Tougaloo College in Mississippi. I ought to be praying every day, given the history of Mississippi and African Americans. And so I think Dr. King would say it's time for us to get more engaged, to get more involved, to be active. I'm saying this weekend. I said it to my church this morning, tomorrow morning at a speaking engagement, that we have to become more active, engaged, and involved. Everybody can help. And you talked about a favorite quote, and I will close on this. Dr. King said that I have decided to stick with love because hate is just too great a burden to bear. That is my favorite quote. It is something about that quote that makes me love my enemies as well.
Dr. Bullock, from your perspective, if he were to touch down anywhere in the United States, but since we're both in the Bull City, I'd love your perspective. If he was able to touch down in the Bull City, what would Dr. King say? What would his reactions be nationally, but also in our city?
Yeah, you know, before I come to the Bull City, I'm gonna go to Georgia first, because I think he'll go home and he want to be with Stacey Abrams for a little bit, and he want to tell Georgia, "Good job, Georgia," you know, and encourage Stacey Abrams in the work that she's doing, and not just Stacey Abrams, but everyone. It was like definitely a community effort, you know, in the work that Georgia pulled off and continues to pull off, and in fighting for Voting Rights Acts and the voting rights, and then getting people out in the last, you know, presidential election. So I think he might go by there first, maybe among some of his first visits. But and thinking about in Durham, you know, I think Durham has come a long ways as well. We have a progressive school board. We have awesome district leaders. We have a Black DA, Black sheriff, Black mayor, the first Black woman mayor, and Mayor Elaine O'Neill, my soror. And so, you know, we're doing a lot of great things. And so, but I don't think he'll let us rest on that, right? You're headed in the right direction. I see the progress. I see what we're doing. And now I think he would now shift the focus to the importance of voting rights. And I know all of us keep mentioning this, but no, it is a big deal. This is a very pivotal moment in history. And so we need to make sure that we're doing our part. And I think he would charge us to do that and tell us, you know, don't get caught up in all the good work that you've done, because there's still, you know, so much so much work to keep doing. And I think he would probably support us in some of those organizing efforts to make sure that folks are being registered and getting out to vote, especially with the midterms coming up.
Wow. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Voting rights is huge. And he would, I would like to think he would also take a 1,000 foot overview of our democracy and ask the question, how in the world could an individual lose by more than 3 million votes and then still sit in the White House and then appoint to lifetime appointments 3 Supreme Court justices? I believe that he would have us ask the question, how do we define democracy? And then how do we establish and measure the power of our individual vote when you look at the Electoral College, when you look at gerrymandering, and you look at the role that money plays in politics? He always says, what is it? It's like, so it's not the survival of the fittest, but survival of the slickest, right? And I think that is what he would say right now. But just shifting a little bit, Dr. Mason, I know you mentioned your son and Dr. Bullock. I know you have a beautiful, beautiful family. And I'll start with you, Dr. Bullock, before going to Dr. Mason. How do we properly discuss Dr. King, with our children? Because I think one of the things that is regularly left out of his legacy, no matter how amazing he is the fact that he was murdered, right? Leaving a hotel room, he was murdered, taken away from his children and his family. And I feel like that part of our history is just completely erased. All the magic, all the beauty that he brought into this world, snuffed out. How do we talk about all of that? The context, the violence of our nation, and what King was trying to do. How do we properly discuss that with our children? Dr. Bullock.
Yeah, and some of the work that I do through our organization, we work with young children to think about racial identity development, to help them understand, a history of race and racism, and help build like activist spirits in them, and to facilitate this and create spaces for that. And so I think you have to talk about it all, but do it in age appropriate ways. So for example, I have a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old. And so I encourage parents to have these very real conversations with children about Martin Luther King, about Dr. King, and finding children's books that talk about, and more often than not, they're going to highlight the speeches and the marches and the protests and things like that. They may not necessarily talk about why is he no longer here, right? And so I think it is important to let children know what happened. In our house, and again, because my children are younger, we talk about the language. They know about Black Lives Matter movement. They know about police brutality, and what happened with George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery. So we have these kind of conversations. But I do think it's important to talk about people took his life. We use the word white supremacy. They took his life because they did not believe in what he was about. They did not believe in creating peace and living in a world that values the dignity and humanity of everyone, right? And we have conversation like, what he stood for. Doesn't this seem like something good? Isn't this something we want? And I was like, when we teach them, there's a lot of people who don't want these same things. And that is why they took his life. And we, again, carry that forward into other instances. There are things that are happening right now to help make that relevant with them. And one of the things that I will tell folks as you're having these conversations with children is to always check in and see how they're doing. Right? Because regardless of how a person dies, it can be impactful on them, and particularly if it's a violent death, if it is murder, right? And ask your child how they're feeling. How does it make you feel to hear that these white men took his life? How does it make you feel? How are you? And then share your own feelings as well as parents. And so in this way, you're engaging in a conversation, or even asking your kid, do you know what happened to Martin Luther King? So that you don't always have to be the one giving all the answers, because they probably know more than what you think they know in the first place. But I think asking questions, telling the truth, again, every child is different. And so meeting your child where they are, you don't have to be overly graphic with children and show the different images depending on age or whatnot. But it is a conversation that you need to have, and not pretend that this man was not assassinated, right? For the work that he was trying to do, for the goodness he was trying to put in society, because people just want access to basic human rights and human dignity, and helping them to see that some of these same rights and harms are still happening today.
Wow, that was incredible. Incredible. Thank you so much, Dr. Bullock. Dr. Mason, what about you?
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Bullock. My poor kids, my daughter's 21, will be 21 Tuesday. My son is 19. Imagine being the children of a historian who lives in a house surrounded by pictures, dead folks, books, etc. It's an archive, so they have grown up with that very early on. And when they were small, I would take them over to the King Center, and we would visit the crypt of Dr. King and Mrs. King. And I remember my son, he must have been about 3. He said, "Dad, is Dr. King in that box?" And I said, "Well, his shell," I'm trying to explain to a 3-year-old that his shell, but his spirit lives on. Taking them to the King birth home, taking them to the museum, exposing them. That's what we have to do. Unfortunately, we allow social media to take over in exposing our children to things that they should get in the home first, if it's possible. And so giving them that education and giving them that instruction. My daughter had a real traumatic experience the first time she saw a picture of Emmett Till's corpse. It messed her up. And even probably about 7, 8 years ago, we went to the museum in Memphis. She couldn't handle it. She could not handle the museum because that was her view of the trauma of Black folks. But she has gotten better. In fact, we're going to Ghana in July to celebrate my 60th birthday. And she said, "Dad, I want to go to Ghana." I said, "Okay, now we're going to be visiting some forts and castles where slaves were, the Africans were kept before they were enslaved." She said, "Daddy, I'm ready for it." So it's gradual, it's a process, it's having conversation with them, it's exposing them. Bernice King is a longtime dear friend of mine, and we don't talk as much, but we used to talk often. And she talked about going into that shell after her father died. She talked about being at a public high school, Douglas High School, and being the daughter of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And people feeling a certain way, feeling this sympathy towards her, obviously, and her trying to deal with it and cope, with that she sees vividly, and she sees all the time, stories about her father's. He's our moral leader, but that was her father. Okay, the same with Marty, and the same with Dexter, and the same with Yolanda. Dr. King was a father, a husband, a brother, a son, a good friend, a fraternity brother, a preacher, pastor. There were people who knew him in an intimate way outside of the civil rights role that he took, and everyone was impacted by his murder, his assassination, etc. So we have to continue to teach. We have to tell the story. We have to good programming like this, and like the women of the movement and other documentaries that I spend too much time watching on YouTube and Netflix. I'm just a sucker for them, but we got to continue to expose and teach our kids.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for them too. I love history. I love the grit of history. I love the dirt. I love all of it. And that's one of the things that, I talk to my daughter about, and, I don't sugarcoat it. And I say, this is our history, and it should never be forgotten that this man, this husband, this father gave the last full measure of devotion so that your daddy is able to do the things that he does, and your mother is able to do the things that she does, and you will exceed our wildest imaginations because of the sacrifices that we made and those who came before us made. And I always love the dirt. I love it because it is dirty to talk about the history that we have come through. But I always think that flowers can only bloom and grow and blossom and reach the sun if they come through the dirt. And I always think that's so important to impress upon my daughter. And I just think it's a great opportunity that we are alive in the time and days that we are to talk about this, as Dr. Bullock said, with three doctors. But one of the things that I also think is absolutely fascinating, because I idolize, love, and revere the legacy of Dr. King, but that love and admiration was not universal at the time that he was doing the work that he was doing. I remember a lot of his work was done in Chicago, and there's a video of him talking to a group of folks in Chicago, and people in attendance started to heckle him. Black folks started to heckle him. They didn't believe in what he was saying and this kind of nonviolent approach or this kind of thing. So they started to heckle him. And so I always think, and I really, really appreciate this, is that in the moment, people usually fail to recognize what an individual is trying to do. And sometimes it's after time has passed that they are able to recognize the magic and the blessing that individual was, but not in the moment. So with that in mind, I did not want to let a moment pass without talking about the incredible work that you two are doing. At this point, I guess, in today's conversation, I wanted to turn it over to you, Dr. Bullock, and Dr. Mason, if you wouldn't mind talking to us about some of the projects and some of the activities and things that you are working on right now, because I think you all are movers and shakers and people in the forefront of the movement in the present. And so I want to recognize that. Dr. Mason, we'll start with you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So the pandemic, of course, caused many of us to find new ways to do the work that we love and are engaged in. Of course, I love history. I work at Voorhees College, also as a director of the library and chair of programs. My passion, of course, is genealogy. It is important that as we teach on the great men and women of our history and culture, that they also know about their two parents, their four grandparents, their 8 great-grandparents, their 16 great-great-grandparents, their 32 great-great-great-grandparents, that they know and understand about their lineage and the wonderful, strong people that they descend from, in addition to knowing about all. I am working on a couple of books for my church, the CME Church. Every Sunday at 5 o'clock, I host a show, CME 151 Conversations, where I met you, had the opportunity to meet you. Been doing that for 2 years. It was only supposed to be one show, interviewing one of our older bishops. And during the show, another bishop called and said, when am I going to be on the show? So my show was birthed at that moment. I enjoyed the conversations. I'm collecting oral history. I'm working on a couple of books, doing a documentary on Atlanta. I have a page on Facebook called Vanishing Black Atlanta. And I have about 55,000 people on, and we just discuss and share information about Black Atlanta. So I'm keeping busy and trying to make the most of this moment that we're in with the pandemic and COVID, trying to ask God to allow me to be creative in this moment, but not to forget how far we've come, but how far we have to go. So I'm excited, about the work that lies ahead, and appreciate this opportunity to come on and to share a little bit about the work that I'm doing and to engage in this conversation with you and Dr. Bullock.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mason. Dr. Bullock, what do you have going on? I know you've got a lot of things going on. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, we're doing all the things. Need to slow down just a little bit. But right now we have coming up in March our 6th annual Let's Talk Racism conference. Our target audience is primarily educators and pre-service and in-service teachers. But we welcome everyone. And this year it'll be virtual again due to the pandemic, but we bring folks together to talk about how racism is systemic and how it intersects with the educational system and what can we be doing to disrupt this, right? And so our theme this year is seeing critical race theory in our schools from theory to praxis. And I'm pulling up information now to make sure I don't get it incorrect. Our registration is open now for our Let's Talk Racism conference, and we're pleased that we'll be hosting Dr. Jarvis Givens, who is the author of, let me get his book title, Fugitive Pedagogy, Carter G. Woodson and the Art of Black Teaching, which was just published last year. So to welcome him and to hopefully bring in a lot of folks to come for 2 days and learn about that in the middle of March 18th and 19th. We have summer camps for kids coming up, which I mentioned, a little bit earlier, but we do anti-racism summer camps for children in rising 1st through 5th grade. We use a literacy-based approach to help kids think about race, racism, skin color, activism in very concrete ways. And so we'll be opening registration for that February 1. And then we're just going to keep doing the work. We consult with local school systems and parent organizations throughout the year, just trying to bring more awareness and more action. So awareness plus action, right? This is how you think about systemic racism using a critical race theory framework. And these are the ways. So here's some knowledge to support you on this journey. And then also here's some potential action steps. These are ways to organize in your community to disrupt and dismantle systemic racism in education. So we're excited for the support that we receive. The community support is high and the demand for the work is high as well. So we're thankful for the opportunity to keep doing this work.
Wow. And that is incredible. And I just want to close by saying these closing remarks. I think one of the things that I walk away from MLK Day thinking is that we oftentimes put this cape on Martin Luther King. We put this cape on Stacey Abrams. We put this cape on Barack Obama. We put this cape on Malik El-Shabazz. We put this cape on Coretta Scott King. We put this cape on Medgar Evers as if they are these superheroes, right? But they are not. They are people. They have families, they have fears, they bleed, they doubt themselves just like everyone else. But what makes them extraordinary is that they are ordinary people that rose to the occasion to do amazing things in extraordinary times. And what I would like each and every person who has the ability to hear or see or experience what we are trying to do, that you too can be the change that you want to see in the world. If there is someone out there hurting, care for them. If there is someone out there shivering, clothe them. Do not walk past a hungry person. And if you have food to give and not give it to them, everyone can do something important. Everyone can serve. And as Dr. King said, that is the true measure of greatness. The greatest anyone can be is a servant. And you don't have to be special to serve. You don't have to have your subjects and verbs agree to serve. All you have to do is love. And going back to Dr. Mason, love is critical. Take advantage of every opportunity that you have to spread love, to let someone know that you love them. And if you see something wrong in the world, you must be the agent of change. Because the only thing worse than an evil person or evil is someone who stands aside and allows evil to persist when they could have done something and they chose to do nothing. I am Dr. Richard Watkins, your candidate for United States Congress for North Carolina's 6th Congressional District. I'm humbled and honored to have been joined by Dr. Mason and Dr. Bullock. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.